My daughter drew a picture of mommy and the other man. I asked questions. It started with crayons and a piece of paper, something so innocent, so small. If I just walked past it like any other drawing on the fridge, maybe I would have stayed blissfully ignorant. But I didn't. I stopped. I looked. And everything changed. She's 6. Bright, creative, full of stories that don't always make sense. She draws all the time. Princesses, animals, stick figure versions of me with silly hats. So when she proudly handed me her latest masterpiece, I smiled. I always do. But this time, my smile didn't last. "Look, Daddy," she said. "It's mommy and the other man." My heart paused for half a beat. "The other man?" I asked, crouching down next to her. "What man, sweetheart?" She pointed to the picture. There were 3 figures, one clearly her, with wild orange curls like she always gives herself. One was unmistakably her mom, long dark hair, the dress she always wears on weekends. But the third? A man with sunglasses and what looked like a suit. I looked for me. Surely I was in the drawing too. I wasn't. "That's mommy," she explained again, "and that's the man from the cafe. The one she hugs when she thinks no one sees." I laughed a little, not because it was funny, but because I didn't know what else to do. "What cafe, honey?" She shrugged. "The one with the big windows. Mommy goes there after school sometimes. I went with her once 'cause she forgot I had a short day." The air in the room suddenly felt heavier. "And you saw her hug someone?" She nodded, pulling out another drawing from her little backpack. This one was Messier, but the same characters appeared. This time, the other man was giving mommy a flower. My daughter had drawn hearts floating in the air. I kept my tone calm. "Did mommy say who that man was?" She thought for a second. "She told me not to tell you. She said it was a surprise." My chest tightened, but I kept smiling for her. "Thank you for showing me these, sweetheart. You're such a good artist." She beamed and ran off, probably already working on her next drawing. I sat there for a long time, the pictures still in my hands, trying to make sense of what I just heard. That evening, I tried to act normal. She came home late, said traffic was bad. Kissed me on the cheek like always, asked what we wanted for dinner. I watched her more closely than usual. Nothing seemed off until I noticed her phone light up on the counter. A message. I didn't mean to snoop. I didn't move toward it. But I saw the name. Just a first name. A man's. One I didn't recognize. She flipped the phone over when she noticed me glance. I didn't ask about it right away. I couldn't. My mind was still spinning from what my daughter had said. What she'd drawn. I didn't want to believe it. But kids don't make up details like that, not unless they've seen something. That night, after everyone was asleep, I pulled the drawings back out and stared at them under the dim kitchen light. I started going over the past few weeks in my head. The late nights. The sudden changes in schedule. The phone always face down. The new perfume she said a friend gave her. Was I really that blind? Or had I just refused to see? I knew I needed answers, but I also knew I couldn't just confront her out of nowhere. She'd shut down. Deny. Gaslight. Maybe even turn it around on me. No. If something was really going on, I had to be sure. I had to be smart. So I made a quiet promise to myself right then and there. I would ask more questions. But not to her. To our daughter. Because sometimes the truth doesn't come from angry fights or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it's whispered softly in crayon. The next morning, I woke up early. Earlier than usual. I just sat there at the kitchen table with my coffee going cold, staring at the corner where she usually sat with her coloring books and cereal. The drawings were still in the drawer beside me. I had put them there the night before, neatly folded but impossible to forget. I wasn't angry yet. I was confused, hurt, but most of all, I was trying to understand what kind of reality I was living in. Because if my daughter's innocent drawings were actually a glimpse into something much darker, then everything I believed about my family was on the verge of collapsing. When she came downstairs rubbing her eyes, dragging her favorite stuffed toy behind her, I smiled and greeted her like I always did. She climbed into the chair and I poured her cereal without saying a word about last night. I needed to ease into it. I needed her to feel safe. We talked about school, about what she was going to wear and what snack she wanted packed. And then I asked gently, "Hey, remember that picture you showed me yesterday? The one with mommy and the other man?" She nodded mid-spoonful. "Yeah," she said, like it was the most normal thing in the world. "Why?" I leaned a little closer, still keeping it light. "Can you tell me a little more about him? What do you remember?" She put down her spoon and thought. "He was tall," she said slowly, "and he wore those glasses that make your eyes look tiny. He always wore a black coat, too. And he smelled like cinnamon gum." Cinnamon gum. That detail hit me like a brick to the chest. A few weeks ago, I remember finding a wrapper in the car, cinnamon gum, something neither of us ever chewed. She said it was probably one of her coworkers. She had given a few people rides, she claimed. I didn't think twice about it then. But now? It was stacking up. These little cracks in the story that suddenly made more sense. I pressed on gently. Did he talk to you? She nodded. One time. He said I had pretty eyes like my mom. He gave me a cookie. But Mommy got mad and told him not to do that again. Did Mommy say who he was? No, she said, frowning a bit. She just said he was her friend from work, but they never talk about work. I felt my stomach twist. What do you mean? They just laugh and talk about grown-up stuff. He told her she looked pretty. And they sit really close. Like when you hug me at bedtime. She went back to eating like nothing she had said was out of the ordinary. And maybe to her, it wasn't. She was just describing what she saw. She didn't understand what it meant. But I did. And it felt like someone had punched all the air out of my lungs. Later that day, after school drop-off and pretending everything was fine, I sat in my car for nearly 20 minutes without starting the engine. My fingers tapped the steering wheel over and over. I knew I needed more. Not just drawings. Not just the words of a child. If I was going to confront her, if I was going to risk blowing up this entire life we'd built, I had to be sure. I checked her calendar. She had a client meeting scheduled that afternoon. She'd mentioned it in passing like it wasn't important. Just another errand in her busy day. But I knew better now. I waited. I watched. And when the time came, I followed her. I felt disgusting doing it. Like some jealous, paranoid cliché. But the thing was, I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't spinning a fantasy. I had my daughter's words, her drawings, her memories. I was following facts now. Clues. And they led me straight to the cafe. I parked across the street, my heart hammering in my chest. There she was. Sitting at a corner table. Smiling. Laughing. And across from her, him. The man from the drawing. The sunglasses. The black coat. The casual touch of his hand on hers. I took a photo. Then another. I zoomed in. Captured their faces. Her smile. The closeness. I didn't know what I was going to do with them yet. I just knew I needed proof. Not for court. Not for revenge. For clarity. For truth. So that one day, if my daughter ever asked why things changed, I could show her. Carefully. Gently. But honestly. I watched for another 20 minutes before they stood up and left together, heading toward the parking lot. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. I had seen enough. The only thing left now was to face her. But not in anger. Not in chaos. No, I wanted her to tell me. I wanted to give her one last chance to speak the truth. And if she didn't, then I'd show her exactly what our daughter had already seen. That evening felt like something out of a play, every word rehearsed, every smile carefully timed, every gesture dripping with forced normalcy. She walked through the door humming, holding a shopping bag in one hand and her phone in the other. She kissed me on the cheek like always, made small talk about traffic, about the teacher conference next week, about how she was craving something sweet after a long day. I stood in the kitchen and nodded in all the right places, watching her like I was studying a stranger. Every little detail meant something now. Every pause, every glance, every casual eye. I kept thinking about our daughter's drawing. About that man's hand brushing hers across the table. About the way she smiled at him. She sat on the couch that night like nothing was wrong. Watching TV? Laughing at the same show we'd watched a dozen times together. It was all so familiar. But the silence between us was louder than the screen. I asked her how her meeting went. She didn't flinch. Said it went well. Said she'd probably have another one next week. I nodded. Then I asked who she met with. She gave a name I'd never heard before. I didn't challenge it. I just let the lie hang in the air, poisoning the space between us. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept staring at the ceiling, hearing her steady breathing beside me, wondering how long this had been going on. Wondering how many more lies she had lined up, ready to pull out at a moment's notice. I kept thinking about our daughter, how she saw something she was never meant to see. How her innocence had uncovered something I hadn't. The next morning, I waited until our daughter was safely off to school. I made coffee like I usually did, sat across from her at the kitchen table, and looked her in the eyes. We need to talk, I said. She tilted her head slightly, still holding her cup, still in her robe, still pretending. About what? I pulled out the drawings and laid them on the table one by one. She looked at them and froze. No gasp. No denial. Just stillness. Like her mind was racing to calculate the safest answer. I said nothing. I waited. Let the silence choke her. Finally, she spoke. Where did you get these? She gave them to me, I replied. She was proud of them. She said that was you. And that was the other man. She said she saw you hug him. That he gave you flowers. That he smelled like cinnamon gum. That you told her not to tell me. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. She blinked hard. She must be confused. No, I cut in, still calm, still steady. She's not confused. She described the cafe. She described his coat, his glasses. And yesterday I saw you. I saw both of you. I was there. The silence that followed was thick. Heavy. She set her coffee down slowly and leaned back. For a moment I thought she might lie again. Spin a story. Say it was all innocent. Say it was nothing. But she didn't. Instead, she looked down at the table and said it wasn't supposed to happen like this. I felt something in me break at those words. The weight of them. The casual acceptance of guilt. How long? I asked. 2 months, she whispered. It started after that big fight we had. I didn't plan it. I didn't mean to fall into it. But he listened. He made me feel seen. And I didn't? She looked up, tears in her eyes, but I didn't care. Not in that moment. You stopped looking at me, she said. We became parents. Roommates. You were always tired. Always distracted. I stared at her, a million thoughts racing through my head, but one thing remained clear: this wasn't just about the cheating. It was about the lies, the manipulation, the way she smiled at me in one breath and met him in the next, the way she used our daughter's schedule as cover, the way she risked everything and kept me in the dark. What were you going to do? I asked. Keep going? Keep lying? Hope our 6-year-old never said a word. She didn't answer, because we both knew the answer. That day, I told her to leave. Not in anger. Not in rage. Just quiet certainty. I packed a bag for her. Gave her time to make arrangements. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I didn't want our daughter to hear a single harsh word when she got home. She cried. She apologized. She said she never wanted to hurt me. That she didn't know how to stop it. That it was a mistake. But a mistake doesn't have a name. A mistake doesn't meet you at cafes on weekdays. A mistake doesn't make a 6-year-old draw pictures that change everything. As she closed the door behind her, I looked at the drawings one more time. I didn't know what tomorrow would look like. I didn't know how I'd explain this to our daughter in a way she'd understand. But I knew one thing: she told the truth before anyone else did. And that mattered more than anything. The days that followed were quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that presses in on you when the normal rhythm of life is broken. The house felt hollow without her footsteps moving from room to room, without the background noise of her phone calls or music in the kitchen. But it wasn't an empty kind of quiet, it was a clean one. A stillness that let me breathe for the first time in weeks. Maybe months. I didn't have to pretend anymore. I didn't have to live under the weight of someone else's secrets. That part was over. My daughter didn't ask where her mom was the first night. She colored for a while, played with her dolls, and then curled up beside me on the couch like she used to when she was younger. I think she could feel the shift in the air, like kids always can, even when we try to shield them. The next morning, though, as she ate her cereal, she asked, "Is Mommy still mad at me?" That question shattered something in me. Why would you think that? I asked. She didn't look up. Because I showed you the pictures. She said it was a secret. I got down on one knee beside her, holding her little hand. Sweetheart, listen to me. You didn't do anything wrong. You told the truth. And telling the truth is always the right thing, even when it's hard. She looked at me, her eyes wide and searching. But now Mommy's gone. I paused, not sure how much to say. I wanted to protect her. But I also didn't want her to grow up thinking silence was safer than honesty. Mommy had to leave for a little while. Grown-ups make choices sometimes that hurt other people, and when that happens, we need space to think and heal. But this isn't your fault. Not even a little bit. Okay. She nodded slowly and wrapped her arms around my neck. I held her tighter than I ever had before. After I put her to bed that night, I sat down alone in the living room, flipping through my phone. The photos from the cafe were still there. The drawings were tucked into a folder now, kept safe, not because I needed to remember the pain, but because they marked the moment everything became clear. I thought about deleting the photos, deleting the evidence. Starting clean. But a part of me knew I couldn't just erase it. Not yet. Because the damage wasn't fully done. A few days later, her mother called. She wanted to talk. Not to me, to our daughter. I agreed, but only on speakerphone. She spoke softly, trying to keep things light, but our daughter's answers were short. She missed her mom. Of course she did. But something had changed in her too. That easy trust was gone. She didn't say it out loud, but I could feel it. The weight of confusion. The silent questions in her eyes. When the call ended, her mother asked to speak to me privately. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. I never meant for her to find out that way, she said. She's just a child. She shouldn't have been involved. You involved her the moment you let her tag along to your secret meetings, I replied, voice low and steady. You thought she wouldn't notice. You thought she'd forget. But she didn't. She remembered everything. And you asked her to lie about it. I didn't think she'd understand. She understood enough to tell the truth, I said. And that's more than I can say for you. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I want to fix this, she finally said. You can't fix what you broke, I said. But you can stop making it worse. Be honest. Be present. And don't ever put her in the middle again. I ended the call. That night, my daughter crawled into bed beside me. Something she hadn't done in months. She wrapped her arms around me and said, I like it when it's just us. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I just held her, promising myself in that moment that I would give her a life built on truth, on steadiness, on love that didn't come with lies hidden behind smiles. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if healing means forgiveness or just moving on in separate directions. But I know one thing with absolute certainty, my daughter gave me the truth before anyone else dared to. She didn't mean to expose anything. She was just being honest, being innocent. And that innocence led me to see what I refused to acknowledge. Sometimes the truth doesn't come through arguments or discoveries in inboxes or receipts left in pockets. Sometimes it's drawn in crayon by a child who doesn't know what secrets are. If this story meant something to you, or if you've been through something similar, I'd be honored to hear your thoughts. Subscribe for more real stories like this and drop a comment below. You never know who might need your words today.